I was 19. I worked as a camp counselor at a summer camp. The job would be to entertain and chaperone a large group of kids with a bunch of other counselors for 3 sessions for the summer. That meant 3 different groups of kids would come at different points in the summer. Each group would come for 2 weeks, which meant I was away from home for this job for a total of 6 weeks. By the time the last group came, summer was more than half over, and I was ready to finish this job and get home. At some point during the second week of the 3rd session, and the final week of the job for the season, one of the kids in my group, named Todd, wasn't feeling good, so he wanted to go back to the cabin to go to sleep while everyone else was around the campfire. When we got back to the cabin for 10 to 12-year-old boys, I left Todd to brush up and go to bed. Upon exiting the cabin, a little girl, probably 8 years old, was waiting in front. She wasn't supposed to be in the section, especially not alone at this hour at her age. I asked her where her group was. She didn't answer me. I asked her what her name was. She said Willa. I asked her what her counselors' names were. She didn't answer. I took her hand and brought her into the front section of the cabin. Then I told her to wait there. I started to run across the camp to the other activity sections, hoping to find the girls' group. When I couldn't find them, I ran straight for the section with the girl cabins. I found one of the female counselors with a small group of 7 to 8-year-old girl campers, and asked her if she had any girls named Willa in their group. The counselor was certain there was no one with that name in any of the girls' groups, actually. Next thing I did was run back to the boys' cabin where I left the girl, with plans of bringing her to the front office building. When I got back to the cabin, however, she wasn't there. I went towards the back section by the beds and asked Todd if he'd seen a girl walk in there, to which he looked confused and said no. So now in a panic, I ran outside and looked in the immediate area of the cabin for the girl, when suddenly I heard a girl's scream come from the woods. I was beyond shook. I can't even come up with better words to use for how I was feeling when I heard that scream. I wanted to run for help, but I felt like whatever danger she could be in could be time sensitive, so I ran into the woods calling Willa's name. It didn't return any calls back for a while, and I felt like I was hopelessly running into the dark woods, until finally, after some time, and calling the name Willa constantly, there was a scream echoing through the woods, very close this time. I continued a bit further, and there she was, that little girl named Willa. She was standing straight in front of a tree looking at me, as if she were waiting. I told her to come to me in a quiet voice as I slowly approached her, but then she turned and started running. I didn't know why she was running, but I had to follow her. She was surprisingly fast, but I kept up. I saw her slow down and stop ahead, though my vision of her was intruded by a few trees, as it was the whole time I was chasing her. I stopped and hid behind a tree, thinking maybe I could sneak up on her and grab her if I was quiet enough. And I noticed something in the near distance. There was some small, dim red light waving around behind some foliage. The girl then ran over to the light and apparently ducked down out of sight. I was trying to put the pieces together, just as I saw some larger figure emerge from where the girl had just disappeared to. And this figure was crouch walking in my direction. I was able to put 2 and 2 together and assume this was some kind of trap. So I turned and sprinted all the way back to the campgrounds and ran straight for the main office. I spoke with the camp coordinator, Jackie, told her about the suspicious activity that just took place, and advised that all camp activity should be cut short for the night. Any incident like this would be treated very seriously for the safety of the children and the well-being of the camp's reputation. Authorities had been alerted about suspicious activity on the campground. They came, I helped them with their report, and they left. By morning, everything was back to normal. The season was over before we knew it, and that was that. I have my own theories of what I witnessed in the woods that night. The most logical has to be the possibility that a man was using that little girl, maybe his daughter, as some kind of bait to lure unsuspecting victims into the woods. And what would happen next? I have no idea. I'm glad I didn't find out. I've been through a lot of hellish experiences in my life, but this one takes the cake. It was about 20 years ago, so I was, I believe, around 20 years old. This was way before cell phones and navigation garments. I was working off the books for a media company at the time, who were paying me for my photography and videography skills. I had all the top quality video equipment for the time, which held to today's standards would be like comparing a Nokia to an iPhone. I was being paid to go out into the wilderness and record hours worth of background footage of lakes, trees, etc. They would use this as stock footage for various documentaries and such. I drove about half an hour to find a good place in rural Maryland to do the shoot. Then I parked my car on a dirt road and hiked for a while, finding a few good shooting locations. It was good for me to get sunset and nighttime shots as well, as different times of day created different lighting for the videos. When I figured I had enough, I started packing up my copious amounts of equipment and threw my 2 bags over my shoulders and began walking. And walking. And walking. I started to realize I should have reached the dirt road where my car was by now. There came a time when I had to accept it. I was lost. I had absolutely no way of knowing which way was which. I'd done wilderness shoots before, and never had I run into that problem before, but usually I'd have a compass with me. Not this time. I kept walking for so long, it got to the point that I was letting out little cries to myself in stress, wanting nothing more than to just find my car and go home, feeling absolutely helpless. Eventually, after many hours, I came across a small building. It was an old house that appeared to be abandoned in the middle of the woods, indicated by the vines crawling up the sides of the home, plus the broken glass. Continuing to walk around in the woods in the night was the last thing I wanted to do, and seeking refuge for the night made more sense. I walked up the wooden stairs to the front door, which seemed to have already been broken in. All I had to do was push it with a bit of force, and I was inside. It was next to pitch black in there, and every step I took, I felt like I was stepping on rubble or trash. I did, however, manage to find the bedroom of the house, which still had a bed in it, mind you, probably a filthy bed at that, but it beat sleeping in the woods or hiking around any longer in the dark. I shut the door and plopped my stuff on the floor and arranged one of my bags to act as a cushion between me and the actual bed itself. Then I tried my best to fall asleep in this dark, abandoned, foreign location in the middle of the woods. It was surreal, and it was scary. The window in the room was broken, so I could hear the wind and bugs outside. But over that, there was the slightest, and I mean slightest little creak from a few feet away from the bed across this tiny bedroom. I looked up, and even though it was dark, I could vaguely see a closet door in the corner. It was moving. It had to be the draft. It had to be. I was letting my paranoia get the better of me in this freakish situation. But then, over the sound of the bugs and wind, I heard something from inside the room now. It was a gurgling type sound, like a throat noise. I looked at the closet again. Something was coming out from the darkness of the closet. I got up to grab my stuff off the ground, and within arm's reach now, I was staring at someone else in this room in this abandoned house in the middle of the forest. Here's my description of what I saw in the brief moments I was staring at this person. I saw a man wearing a woman's wig with some kind of makeup on his face. As for what he was wearing, I didn't really notice that, but I think it was something dark since I couldn't really see it. I grabbed my bags and started saying I'm sorry as I ran out of the house. I didn't know if this was their house or not at the time, but either way I didn't want any trouble. As I ran away from the house, I heard footsteps tailing behind me at first. I think this is when the adrenaline really kicked in, and I suddenly had this insane amount of energy to keep running until I felt I had escaped. And even after that, I kept running, hopping over logs and rocks and twigs, trying to find a road, any road, with the logic that there's only so much forest left in the state, I'd have to run into a road eventually. And finally, I did. I walked down the road, and within 10 minutes, a car passed, and I hitchhiked my way back to my truck. On my way home, I had time to reflect. That house was absolutely abandoned. The door and all the windows were smashed open, there was trash all over the place. I can't use logic to explain it, because it's not explainable. I am grateful I was unharmed, though. My apartment complex sits in a pretty safe neighborhood, so I guess I'm naturally less on guard as far as break-ins and whatever. There was this one night I'd gotten home late from a bar with friends, and though I wasn't very drunk anymore, I was definitely still tipsy. To give a little context on my apartment layout, it's on the ground level and has 2 doors, a front and back. As I entered, I was in the living room, greeted by my dog Chester. Then I passed the living room to walk down a tiny hallway to my room. Chester followed, though he was acting a little weird. I jumped right into bed. I was exhausted. I fell asleep in minutes, and the next thing I remember is waking up to growling. I looked at Chester, who was standing up on my bed, looking at the far corner of the room. I sat up to see what he was looking at, but it was too dark. I had to flip on the lamp. That's when I noticed that he was looking at the closet door, which was cracked open just barely. Right away, I felt a pain in my stomach as I feared the worst. I lightly tapped him to get him to shut up for a second, and he looked at me and went silent. I got out from the bed as he watched me tiptoe closer to the closet. If someone was in there, I had to be ready to defend myself. So instead of opening that door right then and there, I hurried to the kitchen to get a knife. Chester followed me. When I got back into my room, I don't know where it came from, I had a huge bout of confidence overcome me, and I rushed to open the closet door fully. I was shocked, but also relieved to see no one inside. I called Chester an idiot as I went back to the kitchen to put the knife away. When I got back into the room, I saw Chester looking under my bed, growling again. I bent down to take a look, and there was a man hiding under my bed. We made eye contact for a second, and then I grabbed Chester and ran outside to knock on the neighboring apartment's door. My neighbor opened in his pajamas, and I begged him to let me in after explaining that someone was in my apartment. He let me in immediately and let me use his phone to call the police. The intruder wasn't in the apartment anymore by the time the police came and searched the place. If it weren't for my tiny little chihuahua who couldn't harm a fly, I may not have come out of this in one piece.